She wore a pristine white dress to look like an innocent victim, completely unaware that the pearls around her neck were bought with the blood money of her own undoing. Courtroom 4B smelled of stale paper, cheap pine cleaner, and the heavy, suffocating scent of an impending execution. Evelyn Vance sat at the plaintiff's table, the very picture of fragile, broken womanhood, her shoulders trembling in a perfectly rehearsed display of grief. She wiped a non-existent tear from her cheek with a lace handkerchief, her eyes cast downward to catch the light of the morning sun streaming through the tall windows. Next to her sat Julian Sterling, the city's most expensive, ruthless family law attorney, radiating an aura of absolute, untouchable arrogance. Julian adjusted his silk tie, his gold watch catching the light as he whispered something into Evelyn's ear, causing a brief, wicked smirk to flash across her face. Across the aisle sat Arthur Pendleton, entirely alone, completely motionless, a statue of absolute emotional detachment. His hands were folded neatly on the polished oak table, his breathing slow, steady, and perfectly rhythmic. He did not look at the stack of fabricated documents resting between them, nor did he flinch at the venomous glances Evelyn threw his way. His dark suit was immaculate, his expression an unreadable mask of ice that defied the chaos swirling around him. Evelyn leaned back, her fingers tracing the edge of her expensive leather purse, her chest heaving with simulated panic as she prepared to strip Arthur of everything he loved. She looked at him with a predatory gleam in her eyes, confident that within the hour, his grandfather's historic estate, his life savings, and full custody of his twin daughters would belong to her. The silence in the room was dense, a thick tension that made every tick of the wall clock sound like a dropping anvil. Julian Sterling smiled, a predatory grin that showed too many teeth, convinced that this silent, stoic man was nothing more than a lamb led to the slaughter. Arthur's pulse remained perfectly calm, his eyes fixed on the empty judge's bench, his mind already spinning the gears of a trap so cold, so deep, that no amount of money or legal theater could ever save them from the jaws about to snap shut. Julian Sterling stood up with a slow, deliberate theatricality, his expensive leather shoes clicking rhythmically against the hardwood floor as he approached the center of the courtroom. He held a thick, blue-labeled binder like a weapon, shaking his head with a perfectly practiced expression of deep moral disgust. "Your Honor, what we are presenting today is not just a standard petition for marital dissolution, but an emergency cry for absolute protection from a monster," Julian's voice boomed, rich and dripping with manufactured righteousness as he laid the documents onto the clerk's desk. He presented a meticulously structured asset stripping scheme, wrapped in the guise of psychological evaluations and doctored medical reports, all painting Arthur as a deeply abusive, unstable, and controlling tyrant who had isolated his fragile wife from the world. Evelyn let out a soft, sharp whimper on cue, burying her face into her hands as her shoulders shook with perfectly timed tremors, convincing every spectator in the room of her absolute terror. The fabricated evidence was legally airtight, a masterpiece of deception, including falsified text messages, altered bank statements showing financial strangulation, and a staged psychiatric evaluation signed by a prominent, bribed medical professional. Judge Margaret Thorne peered over her reading glasses, her stern face hardening into stone as she reviewed the devastating logs, her gaze shifting to Arthur with an expression of profound, unmitigated disgust. Julian pressed his advantage, leaning heavily on the podium as he demanded an immediate emergency ruling that would strip Arthur of his parental rights entirely, enforce a permanent restraining order, and award 100% of the Pendleton estate to Evelyn without delay. The air in the courtroom grew heavy, thick with the suffocating weight of an immense triumphant injustice as Julian smirked openly at the defense table, knowing his legal framework was a flawless execution. The audience whispered in collective condemnation, yet Arthur remained completely motionless, his chest rising and falling in a slow, rhythmic pattern that defied the storm raging around him. He did not speak. He did not protest, his eyes merely tracking the second hand of the wall clock as it ticked closer to the precise second where their arrogance would become their own executioner. Just as Judge Margaret Thorne picked up her pen to sign the devastating emergency order, the heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom swung open with a dull, echoing thud. Clara Finch, Arthur's quiet and unassuming defense attorney, stood up calmly, her voice cutting through the thick, tense air like a scalpel. "Your Honor, before you sign away my client's life based on a mountain of carefully manufactured perjury, the defense requests to introduce a certified digital forensics log that changes the entire legal landscape of this case," Clara stated, her tone entirely devoid of panic or theatricality. Julian Sterling let out a sharp, mocking laugh, leaning back in his chair with an amused smirk as he shook his head. "This is a desperate, pathetic attempt to delay the inevitable, Your Honor. The evidence has already been submitted and the record is closed," Julian sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. Clara did not look at him. Instead, she pressed a button on her tablet, projecting a highly sophisticated corporate data network diagram onto the large courtroom monitors. "This is the Apex Shield cloud security architecture, an enterprise-grade encrypted mobile network that your elite law firm mandates all high-net-worth clients to install in their luxury vehicles for executive insurance purposes," Clara explained, her eyes fixing directly on Julian's suddenly rigid posture. Evelyn's breath hitched, her fingers tightening around her lace handkerchief as a sudden, cold dread pricked at the base of her neck. What Julian and Evelyn failed to realize when they manually accessed the physical dashcam of Evelyn's luxury SUV last week to delete a highly incriminating audio file was that the Apex Shield network does not allow local deletion, Clara continued, a razor-sharp smile touching her lips. 2 days ago, a major institutional tech venture firm acquired the parent infrastructure of Apex Shield, and the new majority shareholder has fully authorized the legal extraction of all unedited, mirrored cloud backups relating to this file. That majority shareholder is Christian Thorne, Arthur's long-term silent venture partner, a man whose corporate empire now holds the keys to the very digital vault Julian thought he controlled. Julian's smirk completely vanished, his face draining of color as he looked at the screen, realizing that his own mandatory high-tech corporate security system had just been inverted into his legal executioner. The courtroom monitor flickered, displaying a single audio wave file time-stamped exactly 48 hours before Evelyn filed her fraudulent abuse petition. Clara Finch pressed play, and the silent room was instantly filled with the crystal-clear, high-definition sound of Evelyn Vance laughing maniacally in the plush leather back seat of her luxury SUV. "The idiot actually thinks he is keeping the kids, Julian," her voice echoed through the speakers, sharp, mocking, and entirely devoid of the fragile victimization she had displayed just moments earlier. The audio continued to roll as Evelyn's recorded voice boasted about how easily they would manipulate the court system, explicitly stating, "Once the judge reads your fake abuse report and signs the emergency order, we will sell his grandfather's historic estate, liquidate his trust, and split the cash on the yacht in Monaco." Julian's own voice then boomed through the courtroom speakers, sounding chillingly calculated as he replied, "Just keep crying on the stand, honey. Look small, look terrified, and I will handle the rest of the execution." The physical degradation of the antagonist table was immediate and spectacular. Julian Sterling's hand began to shake so violently that his expensive gold pen slipped from his fingers, clattering loudly against the wooden table before rolling onto the floor. Heavy, greasy beads of sweat broke out across his forehead, tracing deep lines through his expensive makeup as his breathing degenerated into rapid, shallow gasps. Evelyn's pale face turned an ugly, mottled red, her eyes bulging with sheer terror as she stared at the monitor, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. Realizing his entire career, his multi-million-dollar firm, and his personal freedom were disintegrating in real time, Julian instantly panicked and turned on his own client. "Your Honor, I object to this file. I was completely misled by my client. Evelyn fabricated these allegations entirely and coerced my office into presenting them. I had no knowledge of her perjury, Julian stammered frantically on the record, his voice cracking with desperation as he utterly shattered their alliance to save his own skin. Evelyn whipped her head toward him, her eyes wide with betrayal as the treacherous foundation of their conspiracy completely collapsed underneath them. Judge Margaret Thorne's face hardened into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury as she slammed her heavy wooden gavel down with a sound that cracked through the silent courtroom like a gunshot. "Silence, Julian," the judge exploded, her voice trembling with a righteous rage that made the remaining court staff freeze in place. "I have sat on this bench for over 20 years, and I have never witnessed a more repulsive, coordinated assault on the integrity of the justice system than the spectacle you two have orchestrated today," she growled, her eyes boring holes into Evelyn Vance's trembling, sweaty frame. Judge Thorne did not hesitate for a single second. She picked up her pen and struck through the plaintiff's petitions with heavy, violent strokes. "This court immediately voids this entire proceeding in its entirety," the judge announced, her voice echoing off the high stone walls. "By order of this court, 100% of the marital assets, all corporate holdings, and the entirety of the Pendleton estate are hereby awarded exclusively to Arthur Pendleton. Furthermore, I am granting sole physical and legal custody of the children to the father, effective immediately, with a permanent, non-expiring restraining order against the mother." Evelyn let out a choked, strangled gasp, her hands flying to her throat as if she were literally suffocating under the weight of her own undone trap. But the judge was far from finished. "I am ordering an immediate, total freeze on every single bank account, investment portfolio, and asset registered under the name of Evelyn Vance and the Sterling Law Group for systemic fraud, money laundering, and criminal perjury," Judge Thorne commanded, looking directly at the two trembling defendants. Turning to the bailiffs standing at the perimeter of the room, the judge pointed a sharp finger. "Bailiffs, take them both into custody immediately. I am issuing an immediate bench warrant for corporate conspiracy, manufacturing false evidence, and treason against the court, and I will personally ensure the federal authorities prosecute this to the absolute maximum extent of the law." The heavy metallic click of handcuffs echoed through courtroom 4B as the bailiffs moved in, pinning Julian's expensive silk-clad arms behind his back, while Evelyn dissolved into a hysterical, screeching fit of tears, her pristine white dress wrinkling as she was dragged away from the tables in absolute disgrace. Arthur Pendleton stood up from his chair, his movements smooth, precise, and entirely devoid of the frantic energy that had just consumed the courtroom. He buttoned his black suit jacket with perfectly steady fingers, his breathing remaining as slow and rhythmic as it had been when he first entered the room. He did not look back at Evelyn as she was led away in handcuffs, nor did he offer a single glance toward the sweating, ruined figure of Julian Sterling. To Arthur, they were already ghosts, minor variables in a complex equation that he had successfully solved and discarded. He looked at Clara Finch, giving her a single, definitive nod of appreciation, before turning on his heel and walking down the center aisle. The heavy oak doors of courtroom 4B swung open before him, and he stepped out into the blinding afternoon sunlight, his grandfather's legacy fully secured, his daughters safe from the venomous reach of their mother, and his absolute freedom intact. His cold, calculated strategy had delivered a flawless execution, proving that the ultimate power belongs not to those who scream and scheme, but to those who quietly control the board. If you love seeing arrogant snakes swallow their own poison and karma served perfectly cold, hit that like button right now, subscribe to the channel, and turn on all notifications so you never miss a devastating courtroom takedown. Drop a comment below with your thoughts on how Arthur crushed this betrayal, and check out the next video on your screen to see another masterclass in instant justice.